historical overview, the Department of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada. I have to put this in here. I'm sure you're aware that we're changing our name and we've been split into two departments. So until that's official, we're still going by INAC. So I think we're going with the DISC, Department of Indigenous Services Canada, but I don't know where that's landing. So for now, we're INAC. We help fulfill the federal government's obligations for consulting and working with people outlined in the treaties, legislation, and other agreements. Indian Oil and Gas Canada was created in 1987 to manage the oil and gas resources on First Nation land. And basically the same ideas of this special relationship and fiduciary duty is also applied to our operation. So that really guides what we do and how we conduct the business on reserve land. So in order for oil and gas to happen on reserve land, the land has to be designated. That's the function of the Indian Act. Most of that was done in the 1940s and 50s. And I think this is important. Keep these dates in mind, and some of the legacy of how we're dealing with this has been from a reactive state. So 1940s and 50s, land was designated, oil and gas activity was happening. Before that, Indian Minerals Unit was established in the 50s to help manage oil and gas activity across the country. And then in 1974, Indian Oil and Gas Act was created to be more specific than the rules that were applied under the Indian Act. And then IOGC, once again established in 87 to replace Indian Minerals West. And then we also have this special operating agency status. So that helps us to be more client-focused, specifically onto oil and gas development, and gives us a little more flexibility so that we're not under the public service mandate. We're kind of like NEB, but a little more special, I'd like to say. Anyways, our mandate, so we fulfill the Crown's fiduciary duty and statutory obligations related to management of oil and gas activity. And we further First Nation initiatives to manage and control their own oil and gas relationships. So we're really a unique entity in this space. So when I talk about designated lands and what our mandate or jurisdictional area is, it's designated reserve land, so it's a really small box. Not all reserves have designated the land for oil and gas development. It doesn't include Métis land. It doesn't include traditional land, or farther north for many of the modern day treaties. So, I mean, that's not to diminish the work that we do. We have 300 reserves that have been designated, and more than 115 that are active oil and gas agreements in place. So there's a lot of activity, and that's, I'm just trying to outline and give you the certainty of where our box is and how we fit into this. So we operate according to the Indian Oil and Gas Act and the regulations in 1995. I'll go into some of the updates on our regulatory framework. We also operate under the Indian Act, and a lot of the work that we do is regulated under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act and the new Impact Assessment Act that's coming up. Also, adding to our uniqueness, we are co-managed with the entity that we're co-managed with is the Indian Resource Council, which is comprised of select members from all that 300 reserve group, and they nominate people to sit at the council level, and then we're further co-managed with that council member with people from the federal department here in Ottawa and members of Indian Oil and Gas. So I really like it. I think Indian Oil and Gas Canada has been on the leading edge of implementation of the UN Declaration, and we don't know exactly what it looks like on a broad scale, but on a microcosm, we've had really, really interesting work done on this co-management piece and developing our act and regulations, which has allowed the member groups to have meaningful, I guess, participation and consent ultimately on the development of regs and oil and gas activity. So a quick, I guess, review of what we do. We negotiate, reissue, and administer agreements between Crown, First Nations, and gas companies. We conduct environmental reviews, inspections, and audits of the activity. We monitor oil and gas production and sale prices. I joke that we're mostly accountants in our department. So this is one of the main aspects of what we do: collect royalties, lease payments, and those kind of things. And then we develop operational policies and commit to ongoing relationship building. I like this graphic. It really demonstrates what we do. We call it the two key approach. So most of the decisions that are made in regards to oil and gas development need both keys to be turned: approval from the community, chief and council, and from our organization. And there's pros and cons, but this is the model that we've chosen. I can't make any comments on the quality of the decision, but I think it works as well as any other method that we've used. So I'll just give you a few statistics. This is from our 2017-2018 year. This is just coming out. So we've collected about $62 million in royalties and lease payments, and you can see that's our biggest line items. Some of the other ones are still meaningful as far as bonuses, and TLE refers to treaty land entitlements, so that's new land that's added to reserves. Just to give you a sense of, I guess, the activity level that we're facing, it's been declining just as everywhere else. So we've only had 9 new surface leases issued and 10 new subsurface leases in the last year. So it's echoing, I guess, the development across the rest of the industry. I thought I'd put this in here just to give you the context of what the money has looked like for First Nations. So from a high of $256 million to now to $62 million. So it's a significant revenue for a lot of communities, and it's important, and they're also seeing the reduction of activity. 2009, we had a new act. It was recently ratified with the introduction of our new regs. So those have been approved, and they'll go to Gazette here shortly, so that'll be a 90-day consultation window. If you're impacted by it or interested in, you'll be able to see what our new regs give. There's a couple of phases to that. So phase 1 part mostly deals with drainage and compensatory royalties, subsurface tenure. So just like a normal regulatory body, we manage the full life cycle of an oil and gas development on First Nation land. So anything from exploration to asset retirement. We do audits, inspections, and we try to work closely with the nation so that they can be meaningfully participate in any of the activity on their land. I thought I'd show you this. Don't worry about the detail, but all I wanted to show at this high level is that at the end of the life, which is where our organization is heading. A lot of the assets on First Nation land are at the end of their lifespan, and so we're entering a retirement phase for most of these. And we follow the same kind of CSA phased approach for environmental site assessment. So in the gray box, it starts with a phase 1, and then if there's contamination, we do a phase 2, phase 3, and a lot of this flow chart will show you, if you're interested, I can send it to you. It'll show you just how we get that meaningful participation on behalf of the communities. And then in the blue box, that's our restoration, our reclamation phase, and then that leads to surrender. So that's just how we've done it, and we've tried to incorporate meaningful participation throughout. I did want to note, the one place that we deviate is that we choose to apply the most restrictive or protective remediation criteria if there's remediation, and that just reflects the use of the land based on the community. So there's lots of cultural and subsistence uses on this, so we can't just apply a wildland or a standard that doesn't reflect the specific uses of this. So in Alberta, generally that's an agricultural standard, which is our most prescriptive contamination standard. And I'm not sure what the equivalent in Ontario would be, but just to give you a sense of how we try to manage. So the first of our case studies that I'd like to bring to you is one of these older fields. Imperial Oil started operating this field in the 50s, and it was shut down in 2008. So you can see a spider web of gathering lines, of distribution and transmission lines. I think we have everything from 2-inch lines down to, or up to 20-inch lines. So lots of questions on how we steward this to an end land use and what kind of remediation standards that we are applying to this. It's very complex, and we have to be really creative because now the communities are wanting to think about the legacy, like what's this land going to look like? They're constrained by land to some degree. They're not getting any more land under the current treaty entitlements, so they want a restoration endpoint that reflects a long-term use. So it has implications for what the infrastructure left in place will look like or not left in place. The next one would be Hazama Lake Indian Reserve up in the northwest corner of Alberta, and it's known for Hazama Lake Wildland Park. So it's this beautiful, ecologically significant wetland complex. It's been certified internationally as a Ramsar wetland area of significance. I thought I'd put this in. This is Alberta's thoughts on what offshore drilling looks like. But in all seriousness, I just want to show this because it adds to the complexity of what we're dealing with here. So in the pink is the Indian Reserve, and so that's under the Indian Oil and Gas jurisdiction, but in the blue, you're dealing with provincial park jurisdiction, AER jurisdiction for oil and gas, and it more reflects their traditional land use, but you're also dealing with federal legislation around SARA, or species at risk, and migratory birds. So very complex way to exit these fields. There's no easy answer to how we do this. So one thing that is interesting here is that the community developed their own restoration policy, which was certainly scary, but we're working through it and we're helping develop an end land use plan that reflects a compelling vision for the community and reflects their values. So Orphan wells, I'm going to zip through here. So this one picture is what we're doing on Manitoulin Island. So I just wanted to show the spectrum of well sites that we're dealing with. As you can tell from the Alberta example, we're certainly concerned about the legacy of all these kind of things, and we're re-looking at the liability associated with this. So real quickly, I'm going to talk about some of my lessons learned about reconciliation. So the capacity issue is a big one. When you're dealing with communities, if you have a new project that is impacting First Nation communities, you have to be really sensitive to the capacity of their governance system and the people. And what we found is that there's no standard method, and all the talk about building relationships and helping them through making sure they can make informed decisions and that reflects the values of the community will go a long way. But now that we're at the retirement phase, we're also trying to think of what the capacity of the community was when a lot of these agreements were signed, and our practices didn't meet the standard that we set, modern standard that we've set for capacity. So we have to think about good faith and the honor of the crown, and that we can't appear to have sharp dealings. So there's a lot of complexity when we think about these old agreements that have been signed for a lot of these things. Consultation and engagement, another one. All these stars represent that two-key system that we talk about. And these are all elements through the retirement phase that we consult and get consent on a lot of times. And one thing I really liked, a recent experience in Alberta, we've signed a buffalo treaty, which was a project that brought buffalo from Elk Island National Park down to Banff. And so you can think about the regulatory hurdles to move animals through federal, provincial, and then federal jurisdiction. And so we also had a treaty made from the First Nations along the eastern slopes of the Rockies. And so they entered a treaty with all the Blood and Blackfoot people. And I thought it was a really nice way to integrate these two ways of doing legal systems. And it made the project a success because we acknowledged both ways of doing law. And I don't know where it goes, but I thought it was a really neat test case. I don't know how we do it in oil and gas. A lot of these things are in the crucible of experimentation, I guess, right now. So transparency, we're using some new tools to try and give all the information. two last points before I'm out. A collaborative outcome is definitely preferable to a negotiated outcome, and I think our Ontario experience, we have a lot of communities out here that have these legacy well sites. We know what we're doing to some degree through our experience on Manitoulin Island, and I think the benefit of collaborating at this stage is helping us out, and I would say it's a good lesson for the rest of it. Creative thinking, I thought there would be an interesting area for certification of our oil and gas products. Some, like in forestry or any of the marine products, can get a price premium for their products when it's certified to a different standard. This Equitable Origin organization, they're trying to develop the first oil and gas certified standard for operating, and hopefully it turns out to be either a price premium or certified purchase contracts if you can meet that standard. I think that'd be neat to explore. The other one is the bullfrog power kind of business model, where you can buy certification from Bullfrog for renewable energy. You're not burning bullfrog power, you're just drawing from the grid, but the benefit goes to Bullfrog to put on more renewable energy to the grid. In this case, it would be a certification for First Nation oil, if that's, or Ontario oil, whatever the case, and then you'd have to operate to a higher standard, but it would certainly generate that benefit for the producer. So with that, that's my perspective.